Continuing Pericles from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. After this, the public troubles were soon to leave him unmolested. The people, so to say, discharged their passion in their stroke, and lost their stings in the wound. But his domestic concerns were in an unhappy condition, many of his friends and acquaintances having died in the plague time, and those of his family having long since been in disorder and in a kind of mutiny against him. For the eldest of his lawfully begotten sons, Xanthippus by name, being naturally prodigal, and marrying a young and expensive wife, the daughter of Tisandar, son of Epilacus, was highly offended at his father's economy in making him but a scanty allowance, by little and little at a time. He sent therefore to a friend one day, and borrowed some money of him, in his father Pericles' name, pretending it was by his order. The man coming afterward to demand the debt, Pericles was so far from yielding to pay it, that he entered an action against him, upon which the young man Xanthippus thought himself so ill-used and disobliged that he openly reviled his father, telling first, by way of ridicule, stories about his conversations at home, and the discourses he had with the sophists and scholars that came to his house, as, for instance, how one who was a practicer of the 5 games of skill, having a dart or a javelin unawares, against his will, struck and killed Epitimus, the Pharsalian. His father spent a whole day with Protagoras in serious dispute, whether the javelin or the man that threw it, or the masters of the games who appointed these sports, were, according to the strictest and best reason, to be accounted the cause of the mischance. Besides this, Stesimbrotus tells us that it was Xanthippus who spread abroad among the people the infamous story concerning his own wife, and in general this difference of the young man's with the father, and the breach betwixt them continued, never to be healed or made up till his death. For Xanthippus died in the plague time of the sickness, at which time Pericles also lost his sister, and the greatest part of his relations and friends, and those who had been most useful and serviceable to him in managing the affairs of state. However, he did not shrink or give in upon these occasions, nor betray or lower his high spirit and the greatness of his mind under all his misfortunes. He was not even so much as seen to weep or mourn, or even attend to the burial of any of his friends or relations, till at last he lost his only remaining legitimate son, subdued by his blow, and yet striving still, as far as he could, to maintain his principle, and to preserve and keep up the greatness of his soul. When he came, however, to perform the ceremony of putting a garland of flowers upon the head of the corpse, he was vanquished by his passion at the sight, so that he burst into exclamations and shed copious tears, having never done any such thing in his life before. And one of the things that we can look at is that, it's not right for a spouse to use the means of a spouse or put them in debt like that for anything that they don't need. So things they want, if it's by permission, okay, but if it's not by permission, that's, stealing. The city, having made trial of other generals for the conduct of war, and orators for business of state, when they found there was no one who was of weight enough for such a charge, or of authority sufficient to be trusted with so great a command, regretted the loss of him, and invited him again to address and advise them, and to reassume the office of general. He, however, lay at home in dejection and mourning, but was persuaded by Alcibiades and others of his friends to come abroad and show himself to the people, who, having upon his appearance made their acknowledgments and apologized for their untowardly treatment of him, he undertook the public affairs once more, and being chosen general, requested that the statute concerning base-born children, which he himself had formerly caused to be made, might be suspended, so that the name and race of his family might not, for absolute want of a lawful heir to succeed, be wholly lost and extinguished. The case of the statute was thus: Pericles, when long ago at the height of his power in the state, having then, as has been said, children lawfully begotten, proposed a law that those only should be reputed true citizens of Athens who were born of such parents as were born Athenians. After this, the king of Egypt, having sent to the people, by way of present, 40,000 bushels of wheat, which were to be shared out among the citizens, a great many actions and suits about legitimacy occurred, by virtue of that edict, cases which, till that time, had not been known, nor taken notice of, and several persons suffered by false accusations. There were little less than 5,000 who were convicted and sold for slaves. Those who, enduring the test, remained in the government and passed muster for true Athenians were found upon the poll to be 14,040 persons in number. And you should be a citizen regardless of what your parents did. It looked strange that a law which had been carried so far against so many people should be cancelled again by the same man that made it. Yet the present calamity and distress which Pericles labored under in his family broke through all objections, and prevailed with the Athenians to pity him, as one whose losses and misfortunes had sufficiently punished his former arrogance and haughtiness. His sufferings deserved, they thought, their pity and even indignation, and his request was such as became a man to ask, and men to grant. They gave him permission to enroll his son in the register of his fraternity, giving him his own name. This son afterward, after having defeated the Peloponnesians at Arginusa, was, with his fellow generals, put to death by the people. About that time, when his son was enrolled, it should seem the plague seized Pericles, not with sharp and violent fits as it did others that had it, but with a dull and lingering distemper, attending with various changes and alterations, leisurely, by little and little, wasting the strength of his body, and undermining the noble faculties of his soul, so that Theophrastus, in his Morals, when discussing whether men's characters change with their circumstances, and the moral habits disturbed by the ailings of their bodies start aside from the rules of virtue, has left it upon record that Pericles, when he was sick, showed one of his friends that came to visit him an amulet or charm that the women had hung about his neck, as much to say that he was very sick indeed when he would admit of such a foolery as that was. Now, if you believe that something has power or that sort of thing, that's different. But you can also have things that remind of something, and things that are just that are completions of the ritual per se. This is prayer, and but the idea, a charm is something you just set out like a prayer flag or something like that, and act like it doesn't count anything like praying for you or something, if you've made a piece of art or something like this, whatever. But, when he was now near his end, the best of the citizens and those of his friends who were left alive, sitting about him, were speaking of the greatness of his merit and his power, and reckoning up his famous actions and the number of his victories. For there were no less than 9 trophies which, as their chief commander and conqueror of their enemies, he had set up for the honor of the city. They talked thus together among themselves, as though he were unable to understand or mind what they had said, but had now lost his consciousness, and had listened, however, all the while, and attended to all, and speaking out among them, said that he wondered they should commend and take notice of things which were as much owing to fortune as to anything else, and had happened to many other commanders, and at the same time should not speak or make mention of that which was the most excellent and greatest thing of all. For, said he, no Athenian through my means ever wore mourning. He was indeed a character deserving our high admiration, not only for his equitable and mild temper, which all along in the many affairs of his life and the great animosities which he incurred he constantly maintained, but also for the high spirit and feeling which made him regard it the noblest of all his honors that in the exercise of such immense power he never had gratified his envy or his passion, nor ever had entreated any enemy as irreconcilably opposed to him. And to me it appears that this one thing gives that otherwise childish and arrogant title a fitting and becoming significance. If you have a good name, you better live up to it, right? So dispassionate a temper, a life so pure and unblemished, in the height of power and place, might well be called Olympian, in accordance with our conceptions of the divine beings, whom, as the natural authors of all good and of nothing evil, we ascribe the rule and government of the world. Well, these various male and female beings are like us in the way that they're not perfect, so they could choose good and evil, ignorance and enlightenment, not as the poets represent, who, while confounding us with their ignorant fancies, are themselves confuted by their own poems and fictions, and call a place, indeed, where they say the entities make their abode, a secure and quiet seat, free from all hazards and commotions, untroubled with winds or with clouds, and equally through all time illumined with a soft serenity and a pure light, as though such were a home most agreeable for a blessed and immortal nature, and yet, in the meanwhile, affirm that these entities themselves are full of trouble and enmity and anger and other passions, which no way become or belong to even men that have any understanding. But this will, perhaps, seem a subject fitter for some other consideration, and that ought to be treated of in some other place. Was it Plato that said that, referring to these demons, that they're like, they're so other that people consider them gods, but they're not really gods? Was it Plato that said that? But it's like even your own soul. If you have seen your spirit, soul, your living being, the real self, not this mind or this body or something. It's like so, you can venture some sort of description of it, but it's like, and the same thing with the other spiritual beings, that the ones that were never incarnated or something. But the course of public affairs after his death produced a quick and speedy sense of the loss of Pericles. Those who, while he lived, resented his great authority as that which eclipsed themselves, presently, after his quitting the stage, making trial of other orators and demagogues, readily acknowledged that there never have been in nature such a disposition as this was, more moderate and reasonable in the height of that state he took upon him, or more grave and impressive in the mildness which he used, and that invidious, invidious, arbitrary power, invidious, arbitrary power, to which formerly they gave the name of monarchy and tyranny, did then appear to have the chief bulwark of public safety, so great a corruption and such a flood of mischief and vice followed which he, by keeping weak and low, had withheld from notice, and had prevented from attaining incurable height through a licentious impunity.